Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're starting, although I'm sure more people will join us. We have several registrations. And we thank you again, those who regularly come to our FOGGS Open Consultation Mondays and those who came specifically to this one because of the topic. We have a community already, and really we're grateful for that, to discuss important issues of global governance, sustainability. And this one is an all encompassing topic because a narrative has to have many elements to provide a myth, a theory, a legend, a paradigm which gives meaning to a whole area of thought and action. And that's for us global governance, the UN, and humanity and the planet. So we are starting slowly again, and you have read when you registered our rationale for this consultation. We see that the narratives that are prevailing at the moment are negative narratives. Often it is my country first and the others third, and my nation, or exclusivist and negative narratives, which may easily lead to clashes and certainly don't take into account often the plurality, also the diversity of humanity, the interests of others, human rights, peace and security, respect for the planet and for each other. So the idea here is to start working, or we have started already, and we cannot finish it today, but to give shape to a new narrative that could really influence policy and could influence the attitude of actors, state actors and non-state actors, and would give meaning also to individuals to act accordingly. And what will cover, of course, it has to have elements about the economy, what do we do with the economy and how it should work for everybody and the planet, or not for some, about diversity, about governance also, the meanings of sovereignty, of personal identity and rights, and a lot more. What is sustainability? What is well-being? What is resilience today? I hope you will contribute, and I'll give the floor first to the FOGGS Vice President, Yoriko Yasukawa. You know her from previous consultations. She has looked through some articles and some publications which are relevant to our topic today, and she has extracted some elements that will help us get the discussion started. Thank you. Yoriko.
Thanks, Yorgo. Hi, everybody. Greetings from Japan. What I wanted to do was to just share a few points about what it means when you talk about narrative, how to go about developing one, building one, how to communicate it. And what I've done is just look at a few interesting articles about this topic. And the most useful one I found was one that was done by Oxfam on developing and propagating a narrative about the issue of inequality. And I think, one important point to keep in mind is that there is a lot of work being done on this topic. There are experiences, there's expertise, there's method to be used. And so I think it is important to keep in mind that these things have to be sought out when we go about working on building this new narrative that we want. And on what we mean by narrative, I think we're talking, not just about messaging about specific actions or policies, but about the way that we see and understand reality, really, the state of the world, the state of our countries, ourselves. We're talking about a story or stories that we tell ourselves and one another to make sense of specific facts or events. So narrative change is really about changing and shifting culture around big issues, and changing established views on issues themselves, and also about what changes are actually possible to achieve, what's politically feasible. Um, and these narratives also have to be broad enough to embrace diverse policy proposals aimed at the same big change. For example, if you're working on equality, it could include things like tax reform or greater access to education or this infamous DEI programs and so on. And so it has to also facilitate alliances beyond the usual ones among like-minded groups like ourselves. And what I gleaned from these articles, and especially this article from Oxfam, is one key step is to really gain knowledge about what people actually think about issues that we're concerned about, whether it's through opinion research or media analysis. And in my own experience also working with the UN, I found that opinion polls are really, really useful because you tend to assume things about what people think. You extrapolate from what you think yourself, or the kind of world that you move in. And my own experience, especially that really struck me, was when I worked in Bolivia at a time of great political polarization. And we tended to work among people who worked in politics. So you tended to assume that everybody else was just as radicalized and polarized. And when we did these opinion polls, which we were lucky enough to have money to do every month, you found that ordinary people were much less polarized, much less radicalized, and much more reasonable than the political leaders. And that was very important to know in order to be able to relate to them, and to talk to them in ways that made sense to people. Um, and in this Oxfam paper, they bring up an opinion poll that they did of 50,000 respondents in 10 high and middle income countries on inequality. Because this paper was specifically on developing a narrative on combating inequality. And among the things that they found was that most people underestimated, often dramatically, the actual level of income inequality in their own countries. And at the same time, two-thirds thought that the gap between rich and poor needed to be addressed really urgently. And there was one question that they asked about the gap between the salaries of CEOs and unskilled workers. And people, on the one hand, consistently wanted the gap to decrease, but at the same time, drastically underestimated the actual gap. And they cite the example of South Africa, where people thought that the actual ratio between the CEO salaries and unskilled workers was around 28 to 1. And they thought that this should come down to around 9 to 1, when in fact the real ratio was 540. So from this survey that there is, on the one hand, a widespread feeling that inequality is a problem, that it is excessive, and that it does need to change. But there is this gross underestimation of how bad things really are. So, from that you have to start with correcting that misperception. Um, and then once you articulate a narrative based on what you understand, what you find to be the prevailing views, then you do need to also research and test that narrative that you develop among different groups, including people who oppose whatever it is you're trying to achieve. And in the case of Oxfam, they come up with this narrative on inequality. I'll just, read you an extract. Our economy is broken. from Ghana to Spain, India to Brazil, absurd levels of wealth exist alongside desperate poverty. Since 2015, the richest 1% has owned more wealth than the rest of the planet. In countries around the world, a small elite are taking an ever-increasing share of their nation's income, while hundreds of millions of people are still living without access to clean water and without enough food to feed their families. Extreme inequality is not inevitable or accidental. It is the result of deliberate political and economic choices, and it can be reversed. And then they go on to, talk about specific measures like tax justice, monitoring public spending, universal access to health and education, and so on. And their big slogan is future equal. And I think, what's important also in this narrative is the language, which is clear and simple, and it's something that everybody can understand. It's free of jargon, and it's concrete. It's not abstract ideas like we tend to spout all the time, like democratic institutions, multilateralism, etc. So I think, yeah, those are the points that I wanted to share, and I hope that's very useful for the discussion, and I'll hand it over to Yorgos,
Thank
moderation.
you, Yoriko. Yes, I wish you could moderate, but you're in Japan. It's getting really late there.
Yes,
So
I'm struggling to keep awake. I'm sorry.
thank you. It didn't show, but thanks a lot. Anyway, narratives are bedtime stories also, I suppose. That get into the minds of young people who manage to get a proper narrative. But what you said was, among other things, that narratives, the way we understand reality, indeed, and these differences between what we think people think and what people think uh, actually is very interesting, and also hopeful in a way that when there is an element, we talk about common sense or positive attitudes, and sometimes we say common sense is very rare and positive attitudes also rare, but all these um, various polls, etc., show that even in the case of Oxfam, but also in other cases, that people are more positive towards um, coexistence or the UN, let's say, or right, or working together when you talk to them on a human-to-human basis. And I think that's also what you said about the politicians. For some reason, one certain reason is when they want to get a clear vote for them, then it has to be black and white. So they make worse the differences. The problem is that people eventually buy them, right? They buy the negative narratives, or they stop seeing the other as a person, but they see the other as a illegal migrant, somebody who has different color, sexual orientation, or whatever. Um, how can we have a lasting narrative of that? Uh, of the positive kind, and how can we get out, as Jerome says in the chat, of the zero sum approach, where you have a competition all the time and somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. We have not managed to change that, and we see it coming back with wars and also in economics, etc. So who would like to say more? Yoriko, I don't know if you want to give any more any clarification or further, or we go to.
Well, maybe just to mention, Yorgos, what you were saying about unexpectedly positive views. I just recently looked at a Pew survey on what people thought about international cooperation, and including the UN. And the majority of people I think it was about 10 countries I think they're mostly OECD countries, the majority felt positively toward international and the UN as well, including in the UN, in the US. And this was a couple of years ago, so things will have changed, presumably because of everything that's happened since then. But I think it is interesting to know that there is this sort of pool of goodwill that, I think we can draw on. So Thank you.
Right, thank you. Who would like to contribute their thinking about this? And if they have any good case of such a narrative, please share. Kerstin,
Yeah, thank you,
please.
George, and thank you, Eureka. I would like us to start from a very different point. You see, what has happened so far is that we have the UN, the goodwill people, science inspired, trying to convince the majority in societies that there are alternatives and that we should be moving in a different direction than we are actually moving. And then there are those who hold power, very often voted into these positions, and they don't give two hoots about it. I mean, look at Trump. Now, that is the challenge, I think, today. We need to be able to get a narrative together that also is attractive to those who are in power today. And if we don't get that right, I mean, you can forget about the rest. So, I mean, I could give now infinite number of examples of this, but I think what really is necessary, UN very often very successful because they have access to the local power players to convince them and to show them that there are alternatives and that they can work and that in fact there are better alternatives than they were considering. But we don't have that same clout and that same pull at the regional level and at the global level. We don't have it in the EU. We don't have it in SADC. We don't have it in the UN. Now, I'm not going to go through a list of all the failings of the current UN, but I mean, we do know that there is more necessary than just reforming the organization, downsizing the organization. I think what we really need is going back to basics. And the UN was founded about maintaining international peace. That is the core mandate. And that's what the Charter says in no uncertain terms. And in fact, gives a number of steps that can and must be taken by the members in order to arrive at a situation where we have international peace. Now, we all know we're failing. So now the challenge is, how do we get through to the Trumps, to the Putins, to the Xis, through Ursula von der Leyen, to all the others in the other regions and say, damn it, that's what you signed up for, and this is what we expect of you. Last point, we're always focused on these horrible wars that are going on. And clearly, yes, we need to be focused on them. But we totally forget there are close to 200 member states in the UN. 150 of those have live peacefully. That doesn't mean that they don't have murder and killings in their society. There is violence in their society. There is violence in all of our societies. But we have other ways of dealing with that. And so we need to strengthen that also at the global level. And for that, we need a narrative. We need a narrative. So let's start from basically we are peaceful. And those who are not peaceful, they are the odd ones out. And they need to be managed. And then let's take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, peace is a central element of such a narrative that we want to construct. But I wanted to ask you, Kirsten, whether you think that leaders can be persuaded post facto or the narrative and the way we should organize societies in the future would really encourage ethical, peaceful people to actually get to power? Or you think there'll be always people who vie for power and we give them more decent substance afterwards? Yeah, I don't know if it's the same,
Okay, let
kind of
me
people.
just answer this very quickly. No, I don't think that you can convince a Putin. I mean, out of the question. So, in fact, we have to take some of the arm twisting politics into the UN, into the multilateral bodies. We cannot just stay at proclaiming all the ills of the world and that needs to be addressed and needs to be corrected and so on. But I mean, we know that Trump, for instance, I mean, he so far has totally failed to convince Putin of anything, right? Different from what he believes. But I mean, at the same time, we read that in principle, Trump would have other means at his disposal to show to Putin that maybe it's worth his while to take a second look at the way he's operating. So there will always be the situation that there will be one or the other ruler who will not abide by the UN Charter. But that's what the Charter says. I mean, if somebody doesn't, then that's what the rest of the members could and should be doing. And we need to get a narrative that makes that very clear to power holders.
Right. We should defend such a narrative collectively
And
also.
that, by the way, goes also for social inequality. I mean, we know that, and I mean, but how do we address inequality? And how do we address it in such a way that, I mean, we don't kill economic flourishing and well-being and
innovation and growth.
I mean, that's where we need the narrative. That's what the narrative, a positive narrative, would have to address.
Thank you. Maybe the answer is with the World Federalist, John Vlasto.
Sorry, I don't have an answer. I'm coming with a question, really. So I was stimulated by that conversation to a thought I've had recently, which is that for all of human history, humans have gathered together in tribes and fought each other. And in such a world, it makes a lot of sense to choose a leader who's good at that activity, a strong man or woman. And that's all very well until you have nuclear weapons or you're trashing your environment or essentially able to cause existential harm to our species, at which point electing strong men and women with an appetite for a fight is not such a good idea. And so there's an observation, but I don't have the answer to it. I throw it out there to hear the wisdom of the call.
Thank you. So the selection of leaders, we still have the primal thing of choosing the strong guys or girls to defend us in a way, but then they can lead us to wars and other things. Edward?
Yeah, it's ironic that the nations fail, but the communities succeed. I've put on this chat a thing we've been doing with the Voyageurs group at the Club of Rome, where we're attempting to assemble success stories where things work. And the really regrettable side of this is that they work in small communities. They work in small island developing states. They work in places that are relatively isolated. And the people, in many cases, have been very successful in getting together, actually compromising and defining futures that they wish to live in. This works less well in larger communities. And we have definitely harmed ourselves in terms of how we define and design our institutions, and in many cases, probably our countries. I'm from Canada, and our provinces argue with each other all the time, but as a province, they do fine. The small island developing states, by and large, are able to get together successfully with some frequency and decide on what everybody is prepared to live with. So I'm afraid I don't have very many answers, only examples that do work. and regrettably, not very many of them at an international level.
Right. So when we go beyond the village council and the elders and the dabas of the world, and then things become like uh, to be efficient, they have to be organized in a very straightforward way, yes, which loses all the perhaps the sensitivities and the humanity of this. And then we have Babel as the result, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to define problems than to define the solutions. And of course, that's why we're all here.
Exactly. But at least we are a community. Yes.
This is true.
Yeah. Thank you. It's good to be together. Daniel.
Good day, everyone, and thank you so much for this space and this conversation. One thought that comes to my mind is actually about the email that you sent, Yurios, where you said, we'll explore core pillars of such a new narrative for peace and resilience, including inclusive economics and fair trade, unity and diversity, planetary respect, etc. And I was thinking, I mean, these are fundamental and fantastic principles, but I was thinking that these are actually what any narrative need to be built upon. And currently our narratives are built on, at least in the West, to use an umbrella term, they're driven by individualism and materialism, consumerism, sort of forms of aggregation for the self. And the principles that you have outlined are incongruent with sort of the ideas that seem to be pervading even our best political systems, which are built on competition and sort of othering, whether it's othering by political party or citizenship or what have you. And so I'm wondering, how do we agree upon these basic principles in ways that can allow a constructive narrative to be built? And then how can we determine which elements of our narratives need to be discarded? And I think often about the principle of gender equality, which is one where it sort of confronts us most closely, that many of our practices and our narratives are incoherent with the principle of gender equality. And you see that very much at the local level, where, as younger individuals are recognizing that, every human's equal, man and woman are equal, and yet their cultural practices that they've inherited are reinforcing inequality. That cognitive dissonance between principles and narrative then can allow for constructive change. And one of the real challenges that I think this community, the international community, faces is that often it is trying to, I mean, like it or not, good or not, impose a narrative on others, a narrative of human rights, or even the narrative, though it's evidence-based, of climate change. These are narratives that may not be coherent with the narratives that are inherited at the local level. And so how do you exogenously assist a community to endogenously create a narrative that agrees with these principles? And I think the UN and many international actors can't do this. It does not speak to the models that have been in place for 80 and more years. And so what are new models that can help us to co-create these narratives at the local level? And I almost might suggest that to try and entertain the idea of sharing these narratives or convincing the current world leaders of these narratives would be a losing game. We would be playing into some of the traps of the modern competitive framework. So anyway, these are a bunch of ideas inspired by many of the previous speakers. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Tan. Great also ideas you contributed, and I cannot really respond. I would like to respond to a couple of them, only that to the extent that we want to build these narratives, as you said, there are some elements, but up to now we have two kinds of narratives perhaps, because when we talk about Trump or Putin, we have a certain kind of macho narrative of my country first or whatever prevailing through war. When we have the other narratives that you also mentioned, which are narratives of human rights, but free trade and all that, they can also be imposing themselves on others and cultures, right? So we need a third way, third kind of narrative, not Tony Blair's third way, I always say that, or Clinton's third way, sorry. But yeah, how can we do that? And especially when the incongruence is when you try to impose human rights in a way that does not respect the human rights in the process of imposition, or those who try to impose, they also don't respect them when they go around fighting also, or invading, or doing whatever. So, yeah, with more modesty, is there a way of doing it, or should we expect for the next pope to say that, and then we say an external source of that kind? Yeah. If you want to say something more, Dan, and then we'll go to Jerome. No?
No, I
No?
think the questions you've raised are the ones that are occupying my mind, and I'm curious what others would add.
Yeah, let's see. Thanks. Jerome.
Yeah, I agree. It's not too easy to change current leaders easily. However, they can have behavior changes. And the classic example was turning around the Cold War on arms control. It was a shared terror of out of control arms race. It was terrifying to both sides. So it was the shared terror that worked. Now, it wasn't a perfect deal, but I would underline how important this is, because if you ask most historians, they'll tell you when two or more great powers confront each other, they eventually use the weapons of the day. Well, by that heuristic, it never happened. We turned around one of the greatest trends in the history of civilization by the narrative of shared terror. Now, we have another opportunity to do this. The idea of shared terror between China and the United States on out of control AI. And there are movements afoot, and I've got a couple of toenails involved in it. And so if we apply that idea of synergetic intelligence versus simply competitive intelligence, what would it be? For example, synergetic intelligence would be China is up for doing it, the United States is not. We need Elon Musk to tell Trump, to tell the State Department to cooperate with the Soviet, with China. All right, that would be the intelligence part. What would be the advantage part? China and the United States got the best money and the best software on AI. They're the ones that the whole world's expecting. So that's the advantage there. And what would be the strategy? US, China, joint resolution of the UN on AGI, future AGI control. So there would be an example of recasting the thing based upon what has worked before, shared terror.
And this would be more positive than the Cold War terror, I suppose, if they really got together too.
Yeah, it would give great hope to the world if that actually happened.
Exactly. And if we use it to do joint projects afterwards in the universe and elsewhere, right? That would be something. Mark Scheffer.
Thank you, everyone. I've really appreciated all of the thoughts so far. Appreciate the sort of exploratory nature of the space. I found myself really thinking about the comments on the Club of Rome and kind of the success stories from that, and the analysis that was offered by the previous speaker, that what seems to have been observed so far is that kind of this process of a population developing a new narrative for itself seems to have worked well in sort of local communities, SIDS, smaller spaces, but has struggled in larger contexts. And in some ways, I think that's it makes a lot of sense. And I wonder, is there ways to view that fact not as sort of a failure or a reality, but just sort of as something inherent in a process of learning, or like a process of capacity building? That maybe the thing is we are learning to build these new patterns, and that we learn to do that sort of at the smaller level first, and from that we can go on to the larger level, kind of in contexts that have a higher degree of diversity among stakeholders, higher degrees of complexity. It seems to me that maybe some of these advances at the smaller levels, for one, they provide models maybe that can just sort of inspire and sustain us that things are possible, but also maybe like lessons and insights that can then be applied to the sort of more more complex structures and systems. And maybe the last thing I'll say around all of this So I'm with the Baha'i International Community, along with my colleague Dan, who just spoke. We actually think a lot about narratives and sort of trying to create new narratives, and think it's very important. And I think it's something that is very easily seen and experienced by others as just abstract and conceptual and theoretical and maybe nice sounding, but not worthy of serious attention. And it seems like one of the real key needs for actual sort of measurable progress is a pattern of action in practice. I think that's what speaks to people more than just a narrative laid out on a page. And so I wonder, are there ways that we can sort of support this embodiment of new narratives in action, in practice, and then ways to sort of present that experience in ways that allow it to be replicated at larger levels?
Great, thank you. That would be indeed promising. Gradually, I know how long it would take and if we would avoid another major war or anything. Also, you brought in the element of religion, right? I also spoke about the Pope before. Religions are communities in their own way, and sometimes they try first to create this positive narrative within themselves. But then when they come together, they again clash because they base their narratives on some elements that are dogmatic, right? I don't know if, while usually the ethical elements are the same. Yeah, I don't know if we could also think about that. Why don't we bring the common ethics that are mainly elements of all religions into that instead of fighting for the prophet or the history of the religion? I don't know if you want to say something, Mark, on this.
Not so much on religion, but I was just thinking like the idea of not only a narrative, but applying a narrative like in practice, whether that's a local level, a national level, a regional level. I think that's something that seems to have that it's not just one person's set of ideas versus another, but like what does it actually look like in practice when we take some suppositions and try to enact them?
Yeah. Thank you. Great. Mike Nickerson, please.
Thank you. It's definitely an important way to address the evolution of civilization, to have a narrative that describes where we're going. Where we have gone, where we've been going, is a hyper materialistic world, which is based on material exploitation. Resource exploitation creates a lot of pollution and then conflict between nations as we try to gather it up. And most of this modern techno-industrial perspective of the world, we're looking at how do we fine tune that, and let's hope that we're able to introduce some sanity to it. But we come from a completely different direction. Before we were overwhelmed with industrial production and had to be taught to consume, to absorb all that stuff, we spent our spare time relating with each other, learning stuff, playing sports, there was a lot of human activity, life-based activity, which was the mainstay of human culture. And we've lost that to be consumers. And what we need to do, or one of the vectors that we can use to get out of the mess we're in, is to encourage, a return or a advancement into a more life-based society rather than consumer-based. And then we can use the material world in a way that makes sure that the human population and the natural world are taken care of, and just have a good time. So we say more fun, less stuff.
That's good. Good and simple.
Yes, I wish. So it's a bit of a utopia going back a bit, but do you think it can be done now with social media also, living in a virtual reality? Can we do that, or we should just discard that and go back to more direct ways of communication?
Yeah, I don't think we'll be discarding anything. It's social media is a vector through which this can move, and to an extent, it's social. It's not so much a material-based thing, but it's also used immensely for promoting material projects,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
It would be lovely if some jurisdiction would say, Nepal did their gross national happiness, right? Looking at something besides material growth as a positive thing. Any jurisdiction can do it, but largely it's an individual thing. If one understands it oneself and represents that in their living, then that helps to spread it around. But more fun, less stuff is 4 syllables, and it enters the mind before people can discount it. spread that around and use it as short form for we need to make our economy serve the needs of people and ecosystems rather than the needs of money.
Indeed. Amen, I would say, but yes, not partial. Anitra, yes.
Yes. I'd like to pull together several things that several people have said. We're having on the Jubilee year of, as a tribute to Pope Francis, a meeting on education. He was very strong on educating the poorest of the poor. And our members, Mampela Rempela, who was part of the apartheid, and her colleague, John Gilmore, have taken the poorest Black students in ghettos who were not allowed to learn science or math under apartheid and found new transitional ways so that they now are getting, after 20 years of this new method, they're getting the highest national test scores in South Africa on science and math. And part of this is to give these billion youth in South Africa and Africa south of the Sahara, as well as in South America and the poorer places in Asia, the skills that they need to be marketable when they are adults. And this is what it's lacking. So the whole education for hope is going to be comparing methods from around the world and what has worked in various communities, and see if we can find a series of methodologies that educators could apply in all contexts, throughout different cultures, throughout different educational systems. And we'll be having that in the fall, along with the Pope's Jubilee in Rome, but also a meeting in Johannesburg and in Buenos Aires. And this will begin to create something, because education, of course, is the cornerstone on which many communities, and then the adults coming out of this system from the communities, are founded. So I just wanted to add that some kind of international movement toward more positive futures is occurring, and the positive future would be for the youth, the really, really poor youth's educations. Thank you.
Does it include also an element of ethical education or something, or is it giving them skills to compete in a market that can still be competitive or zero sum? Or will they be the new leaders that we would like, or will be just leaders who changed their class? They went up, they went to Harvard, and then they became part of the network of leaders. Or yeah, what kind of education?
The students, after 20 years coming out of the Mampela Rempela John Gilmore Leap schools, are taught on a weekly basis to give back to the community and to interact with the community. So they do minor health things in their communities, and they do parties for the very poor children on holidays in South Africa. And they also have mindfulness that they are going to be the first models out of their community, so that the women and the handicapped and the other people are going to follow their patterns. So it's a very interactive and community-based kind of mentality. And none of them have left their own country as economic refugees to go to another country to make a lot more money. And all of them give a portion of their new income when they have their medical jobs or engineering jobs or whatever, teaching jobs, back to the community that they came from. So I don't know if that answers your question,
It
but
does,
that's the model.
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Jan.
Yes, so values in education. For the past year, here in Costa Rica, I have been asking people this question. Tell me 5 things that you were taught as you were growing up in order to be a good citizen in a democratic country. And across the board, be they people I know, work with, friends in my neighborhood, or even strangers, because now I sit with strangers in cafes. This is what they say to me, and there's no silence to think it over. They say, respect, being of service, working with the vulnerable, avoiding conflict, and if I must get involved in conflict, try to resolve it non-violently. And so now we have a situation where gangs are coming in from other countries nearby and things are happening. And we have a society that has been used to living according to these values. And I just wanted to put this into the mix today because on the one hand, it can be done. We have the capacity to do the inner work and the societal work and to build it into our educational systems. On the other hand, the world is changing so rapidly and we're looking towards a future that is taking us more and more into levels of dysfunctionality and chaos, uncertainty, etc. And so I think one of the things that we need to grapple with in terms of this type of conversation that we're having today is how to balance what I call that inner world and that outer world and the relationship between the two.
Right. We should not disadvantage those educated with values in a world that is really dangerous for them in a way, right? I mean, we have to see, yeah, until we change the world itself if we can. Right. Great. Thank you. David.
Hi, Georgos. Lovely to be with you all, and thank you for arranging this. As I think you know, I'm struggling with Peace Child 4 performances this summer where we're co-creating a story set 50 years in the future in which we've solved the existential crises that we face today. So I love the idea of more fun, less stuff. And I think that that's something that young people would really relate to, but they'd also very strongly relate to the shared terror of the rapid increase in militarization and the sort of preparation that's going on in the media for getting young people ready to go back to war when their governments declare it. And certainly that's a, a symptom, I think, of the anxiety that they feel, and which is the cause of a lot of the mental health problems. But your conversation today is all about how we create this culture of peace. And I think storytelling is absolutely at the heart of it, because we need a kind of Hans Christian Andersen for the next 50 years to tell us a story of how we're going to get to the kind of collaboration that the United Nations has stood for the last 80 years, because as the Brazilian ambassador to London told us the other day, there is no salvation without collaboration. We cannot get there without collaboration. And what we're seeing today is ever stronger tyrants in charge of global superpowers, and a United Nations which today I think is announcing a $600 million deficit and the possibility of running out of all peacekeeping funds by September. So the UN is broke while the tyrants are prospering. Now, we all remember Gandhi's dictum that when I despair, I always remember that the way of truth and love always succeed. Remember, always, tyrants and cruel people fail and truth and love succeeds. And we also remember Martin Luther King saying that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Well, I have to say, a lot of young people feel that today the arc of the moral universe is bending towards tyranny. And that's the story that we have to revoke and dispute with enormous power and passion, because we cannot afford for a United Nations system to go broke. We had a meeting here in London with Mark Malloch Brown and several key people who are saying we're going to have to get used to the fact that the United Nations is going to be having a much shrunken budget. It's not going to be able to afford the things that we need it to do. It certainly is not going to be able to take on the challenge of which was its founding principle, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Now, that is not a story that the young people that I'm working with want to hear. They want to have a United Nations that does save their generation and succeeding generations from the scourge of war. And we have Ukrainian refugees living with us here in our house who are determined that there should be a United Nations or some system that is going to save future countries from going through what they've been suffering for the last 3 years. And that is the story that we have to tell. And I think that, we should absolutely focus on the positives. There are, the IMO decision that I put in the chat, that to me is amazingly positive. And right here in our village, we have a young engineer who's creating the pump systems that will create the microalgae fuels that can transport, that can actually fuel the tankers and cargo liners of the future. So there are these positive stories coming out, and I think that the culture of peace depends upon us all feeling positive, imagining a future 30, 40, 50 years since in which the United Nations is restored and powerful and able to fulfill that mandate of saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war. We just have to work out how to do that, and that is a storyteller's job. Thank you.
Then we can create, how is it called, digital twin of Andersen, and let that twin with AI support Hans Christian Andersen, right? Write a story and see what happens. I mean, we could try that. But
Good
thanks.
idea.
Yes, Jerome. Okay, it will be in your next Millennium report or something like that. Another idea that, from what I hear, also is that let's say we need fighters for peace. Also, as Jan said, you cannot be slaughtered for peace only. Okay, Gandhian tactics, but I don't know how many people would be open to that kind of pacifism. But we can have superheroes, because people also like uh, comics and all this. But you don't need Captain America. You need Captain Earth or something. And I don't know if it's a man or a woman or many of those. So perhaps we should try to find a story like that would excite also young people. It seems, that's what we certainly need to bring them on board. Thanks. Paula.
Sorry, George. Sorry, George.
It's okay. There you are. Yes.
To get online here. I just wanted to say I am very gratified by what people have said so far. And one of the things that I want to point out is the question of moral values. And as there was somebody speaking about the experience in Costa Rica, they don't have an army. They have respect for peace, peaceful resolution of conflicts, I guess rule of law, because that's really the way to go in terms of peaceful resolution of conflicts, but also mentioning moral compass and trying to align values with those or trying to align the world to those values is really the role of the United Nations. It's not a given, right? And the fact that the UN stands for those principles for human rights, for fairness, for justice, for peace, and that not all countries are aligned with those values, although Costa Rica has been one of those countries that has historically been aligned with, is I think one of the most critical values of the UN. We're speaking about things that other countries may not be even considering, it may not be a part of the public discourse. And so bringing those normative and core and moral values to light, speaking about them, and making them accessible and neutral and available to people, I think is one of the critical things the UN should promote. And one of the things that we should say is the UN has as value added, because without the UN, what mechanism would we have to convey these values universally? Really, the normative, the moral, the justice, the fairness, and freedom of speech, and all of these values that are underpinned by, by what the other speaker spoke about, the sway of events turns towards justice. In the end, that's what it means. All of these values are swaying us towards fairness and justice, and that's the way to maintain peace. So, anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Paula. And you alluded to, of course, like you talked about the UN, and there is a parallel discussion now about UN reform and what was mentioned earlier. The UN is in debt, and I think David said that. And we are worried about the future of the UN, and we have this narrative. They are not the same exercise exactly, but of course they come together when we expect so much from the UN in terms of a global narrative that brings us together. But also somebody mentioned from a previous discussion that we had in open consultation on the role of middle powers. And Paula mentioned Costa Rica. I mean, the definition of middle power is not very strict. It is a small country, but still it has some moral authority because of the abolition of their army and the positions they take on major issues. So yeah, well, let's keep that in mind also, whether such a narrative, the good cases can come from middle powers all over the world. Thanks. And John.
Thanks, Georgios. I'm interested in how we follow up this meeting. So I'm struck by a couple of things. First of all, there seems to be very widespread agreement within our bubble, which is perhaps not surprising. But then we see evidence that it's not just within our bubble, and you got the 89% Guardian movement of people who support climate action, and you've got widespread sort of common values on which human rights are based. So can we articulate the common message that we have, that people on the whole want peace and they want justice, and that we recognize the need to govern ourselves collectively at the global level? Now we have an environment crisis and nuclear weapons and the like. Tying into your second charter comment, Georgios, I mean, is there a role to be had to distill a simple common message that all of us could then agree and take out to all of our various networks and start to build a movement?
Great suggestion, and very important to have a follow-up and practical impact if we can. Yes, thank you, John. Yoriko may have the simple message ready. No, Yoriko.
Yeah, I just wanted to share with you from this Pew survey on international cooperation that I mentioned. One of the questions is, or a statement that, where the question is, do you agree or not agree? And one of them is, countries around the world should act as part of a global community that works together to solve problems. 81% of the respondents supported this. And another encouraging thing about the survey is that the younger the respondents, the more positive toward international cooperation and the UN. So I think it is important to take into account this kind of data and to incorporate it into whatever narrative that we weave, to say, I mean, so we all believe that we should be and work together. So let's make it happen. Let's get our leaders to get on board with what we believe, which is that we should work together.
Great. Yes, and it's very positive that young people also are even more positive about this. Do we need like the 10 new commandments, John, or like 5, or peace and justice? Paula also spoke about it, of course. I mean, which are already there in the UN Charter and other documents, I'm sure, but should we make them clear and in some way try to impose them on leaders and institutions and things, and in our lives, of course? Paula? Paula, please unmute yourself.
Sorry, I'm all for that. I think that's a wonderful idea. But I also have another one. there was a document that was leaked that's on the internet. It's on LinkedIn, and I think, George, as you commented on it, on proposal for budget cuts for the UN. Apparently from the Trump administration. I'm looking at the document and some things make sense, others don't, but maybe looking at this more from the values and the norms that the UN wants to convey to the world might be a way of also addressing this and reacting to this leaked document. I don't know if you want to do it or not, but they do keep peace, humanitarian affairs, sustainable development, human rights. So the topics are there. The question is, are they making proposals that make sense and that don't undermine the efficacy of the UN and the way that it lights or shows the way for countries, generally speaking, aligned with those values that we just discussed?
Ola, I think that this is a document that was leaked like 6 pages, right? Which was prepared by an internal committee of the Secretariat, which works for the Secretary General's UN 80 initiative. But of course, under pressure from what is happening with the US and Dodge and all that. And there is also a new organization, Dodge UN, which is trying to push similar reforms like in the US government into the UN. But this is, I think, prepared internally. It was supposed to be confidential, and it's not a final thing that the UN Secretary General has agreed, yeah, they are supposed to come up. The Secretary General, I think, wants to propose specific things, how to make the UN smaller and more compact, so that will cost less. But my comment that you said before on LinkedIn and elsewhere is that of course, that's good if it's rational and perhaps it has grown too big, etc., in the process. And perhaps countries have to do their own part and they should not expect everything from the UN. But if you have a consolidated UN, it should have a lot of at least moral authority and a center that is active. Because if you have in the center of such a small organization somebody and some group of people who are under pressure not to do anything from the P5 or whatever, then we may lose the whole UN. I mean, it may be not worth having it there anyway.
Which
I know you.
is what
Yeah.
I'm trying to address is really, these aren't really, I think I've just looked at it very quickly, and I generally speaking, I think that there are good proposals there. I don't think that they're bad. I think they make sense structurally speaking, but on the other hand, we must speak to the motor of the UN, right? And its reason for being, its raison d'être. And we have to highlight it, and we can't lose that in the process of reform. And that's, I think, what we need to highlight.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. Thank you. John?
I don't think we need any more commandments. I have a collection of them here on my wall for the book I'm working on, and it's just amazing how many messages we have received over time. And the question is, why haven't we learned to live by them? But I would like to mention Erwin Laszlo's 10 Commandments for a Timely Vision, which I think is very interesting, and I'll try to get it into the chat before we end. I didn't want to leave the meeting without mentioning the words of the Ukrainian human rights defender, Alexandra Matvichuk, because I really try to share it with everybody every day. And she says, the truth is that freedom is very fragile. We don't attain human rights once and forever. Every day we have a choice.
Yes, we have to fight every day to keep right all these things that we have.
When people say there's nothing I can do, I say, yes, you can just share this way of thinking every day with the people you think you can share it with. And then you're doing something, and that's a contribution, and it's going to make you feel stronger and more resilient. And so if we can just use these small ways to connect with one another, that will help us therapeutically as well as pushing the message. That's what we try
Really
to
send it to us. Yes, I think we can make at least a collection and a publication, a small one that's like a guide or something, an aid, yeah, for our
Yeah.
daily.
I'll
Yeah.
try to put something together based on the book that I'm working on. I've promised to finish this year.
Let us know if we can help.
Messages, global messages of peace, sustainability, and love.
Right,
Over
great. And
time.
few, but very powerful ones. Perhaps we have them every morning. We have a look, and then we start our day, and we try to
And
be.
we're not going to publish it as a book. We're setting it up on a website, and it will be in languages, and it will be open to the public. So we avoid translators, we avoid publishers. I'm sorry, but yeah, and I have a team working with me on that here in Costa Rica, and we're moving
Okay.
forward.
Looking forward also to receive it when you're ready. Let us know. Yeah, we can help also promote it. John.
Just to articulate what I was thinking in response to some of what I've heard is I'm not proposing that we issue a statement, let alone commandments. What I'd like to see us do is build a movement that can actually move the world, which I'm not sure that civil society statements necessarily do. And then I think the first step I would be very happy to join a working group on this. I don't have the capacity to convene such a group, so that one would need to convene a group if one were to take this forward. I don't know if FOGGS has a capacity. FOGGS is hosting the call where the idea arose. And then the first task of that working group would be to see if my bold assertion that we have an underlying common vision is actually true, or whether the narcissism of small differences will undo our good intentions.
You're right. And there is a lot of narcissism of many kinds, but we have a group of young people, if they want to take it on board, like we call them at the FOGGS Youth Board or Council, and some of them are here, I can ask them afterwards. And perhaps, yeah, we could work together with them. Paula, is your hand left there, or you want to say something? Okay,
No,
Kirsten.
George, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No problem. Kirsten?
Yeah, thank you very much. John, I would just want to argue in the opposite direction. I think it would be nice to have a little statement, but not to sort of publish it as such, but then to take it into the civil society, into the student communities, youth communities, environmentalist communities, and so on, and see, does it resonate? Do we strike a nerve? Because, I mean, we do need to strengthen the system that is supporting peace and justice and sustainable economics. So, I mean, I mean, we're all working on bits and pieces, but it doesn't add up to a strong system, and that is somehow where we need to find a way to get to. And I also like this reference to storytelling. I mean, I have used, when I was teaching, I've taken, let's say, a speech by the Secretary General and showed it to my students. And then I wrote a speech that I would have liked the Secretary General to give. Or the same with Angela Merkel about migration, And a lot of things that are now being discussed in great controversy, I mean, I was able to anticipate it right there and then. And if our politicians could, I mean, if we found a way to get them to look at the consequences of what they are pursuing at a particular point in time, then, I mean, maybe we would get to a situation that would be more balanced, strike the balance in particular between, I mean, community needs, individual needs, would not be prescriptive, but would get a lot of voluntary buy-in. And, I mean, this is what, I mean, we're all after, But, and so I'm not for getting more strong men and women by no stretch of the imagination, but I'm sure I want to get a strong system where the powers that be feel obliged in whatever they are doing to peace and justice and sustainable development. I mean, that's the challenge, and that's where we need to get to. Thanks.
Indeed, yes. Thank you. We can do also the working group and take it to places afterwards, a draft, and see what other sectors would add. And as for the speeches of leaders, sorry, my experience is that there are the speech writers and there are the leaders. The speech writers write usually nicely, often, and what should be said. And then the leaders, when they make their choice, they are not bound by the nice things that they have said necessarily, but which is, and we have to make it binding. You're right. Great. John?
Very briefly, just to clarify, I'm not against statements per se, just so long as that isn't the end of the process. And to create the obligation on the leaders, you need the movement.
Yeah.
I think we agree, yes. The various steps and all of us just put emphasis on one or the other, but we have to bring it together if we can. And we have also, like Kerstin and others here, we are former UN people and we really care about the UN, and we're in the process also of trying to see how the UN could evolve to play its role better, peace and beyond. Thanks. Jerome?
Yeah, I would like to vote 110% for having us push out the simple phrase that was just suggested before of more fun, less stuff. 4 words, more fun, less stuff. And we can take it on ourselves to bring it up. So when I give talks or I can sort of just push it around a little bit and see if we can get that little meme running around the planet. I think that's really good because as you say, well, what kind of fun? Well, what kind of less stuff? I mean, it'll lead to other stuff, but I learned a long time ago because I argued for having period at the before .com stuff, and I lost because it was 2 syllables. Now, period is correct because it's the correct period at the bottom of the line of the column, right? Because period is not correct. Because period, period is correct, but dot's not. Dot can be anywhere. But I lost the argument because it was too long. So I learned from that is short is better than long, and I think the best phrase I've heard so far is more fun, less stuff.
Okay, that will be the first commandment. No, anyway, whatever.
Yeah, I think we should take
Does
it
it work
on.
for all cultures, you think?
Yeah. What culture doesn't want fun?
And stuff is more environmental also, right? I mean, you go to that discussion more.
Yeah, but it goes to like, what are you arguing about stuff? I mean, it's not only environmental, it's also conflict. It's all kinds of I think it's the best meme I've heard so far.
It's like stuff happens, right? That was the.
That's right.
Okay, that kind of stuff.
That's right.
Thanks for the old hands here. Mike.
I'm delighted to hear people catching on to that. I have had some people who thought that peace and environmental justice, these things weren't included in fun. But what I say is, think of how much fun we would feel. Fun is an uplifting experience. Think of how uplifted we would feel if the world was consciously aiming for peace and justice, and then you can easily include those other details. I'm going to put my email in the chat. Anybody who wants more details, we're trying to stimulate discussion and distribution of the more fun, less stuff theme. Thank you.
Sure. And if we finish and people have no access to the chat, I mean, you send info@foggs.org. You can send us something that we can share with everybody. Great. Any other comment, suggestion? There is.
Will you be sending the list of the chat stuff, or will there be not a report of this, but something that we can all, because we don't remember everything.
Exactly. No, what we normally do is, of course, we're recording this, and that will be available on the FOGGS YouTube channel. And also we have a special web page on the FOGGS website about these open consultations. In a few days' time, you'll be able to find the recording and the summary with AI help. Not attributing things, but with the main points. Right. And if you need more access or to contact people, you let us know. Yeah, sure. Um, any, perhaps Manan, we can put there the link to the web page for the open consultations.
Sure, yeah.
Manan is behind all this. There he is. All AI and IT and more. So, do you really want to proceed like that? I mean, we can start also with the young people, try to put something together. It could be a statement which can be going around. And of course, we can promote all the other things from more funless stuff to Jan's mottos and things like that to help each other and to create a bigger movement about this if we can. And eventually, the ideal is, of course, yes, to make it almost inconceivable for a leader or for anybody to not respect some basic principles that now nobody seems to be respecting, right? I think. I don't know if anybody, yeah, John?
I want to solicit volunteers or give people some means for volunteering to join a working group.
Yes. I will introduce you to our young colleagues afterwards. I don't want to push them here to take a position if they are interested, but anybody else, like John, you would like to? Or you want to say something?
Yes. Well, yeah, I think, we've been talking about content and method, and I think we also need to think about process, how to do the work, the strategic part. So in our foundation, we have for 7 years given an annual virtual course. So we have a whole collection of ex-students that we can get to virtually. It's in Spanish, so Latin America and Spain. And we also have a couple of projects where the people who work on the projects from different countries are connected virtually. And we do things virtually together, and that's been going well. So I put that at the disposal as part of the process here in the Western Hemisphere. We're not too connected to the United States and Canada. It's more Latin America and the Caribbean. And people who not very many people speak English. So but we're talking about grassroots organizers, activists, human rights defenders, all ages, all generations.
Ningún problema. Hablamos español
Okay.
también. Yorico habla
Perfecto,
lo mejor español allí.
Okay.
We can have also sessions in other languages if you want. Absolutely. Yes.
Good.
Yeah. At least the 6 official languages of the UN. I don't know about Chinese though, but the rest, I have an idea. Yorico?
We do work in the four languages of this hemisphere.
Okay, great. Yes. Yuriko, you want to say something?
Yes, no, I just wanted to second this idea of spreading around this idea of more fun, less stuff, rather than, just going through this some complicated process of coming up with a message. And, because I think it is something really quite profound, this idea of more fun, less stuff. It's really about valuing well-being and what's inside you rather than accumulating material wealth, right? And it's also about bonds between human beings and see where it goes, and I was thinking our colleague Jason does such great visuals around texts. And maybe he could try to come up with something or several and share so that we could all share it in social media and other means.
We'll ask Jason to do that, you mean? Or who?
Yeah, I mean, if he would like, yes.
Yes, our colleague Jason. Okay, yes, of course. Of course, for me, fun may be a bit misunderstood, like you're not serious. I don't know, more more soul, less something, but then it
We've
becomes
had
too
you
serious.
might have had enough seriousness already.
And it also has to sound good, you know?
Yes,
It
it does
has to
sound.
sound good, it has to have rhythm, you know.
Why
And,
don't we
you
talk
know,
about
I think a
joy?
narrative that tries to include too much stuff is not going to stick. And even really simple things, and this is something that I learned from James Grant in UNICEF, is that you have to repeat it 1,000 times. I mean, people just, it doesn't get through to people the first
Kirsten
time.
wanted to.
You think it does, it doesn't. People forget, you know, so it has to be easy to understand, short, simple, and also encompass important ideas just in a few words.
No, I mean, if you find fun too difficult to convey, how about more joyless stuff or something like this?
Yes, because in Spanish, fun doesn't work too well, but alegría, I think,
Alegría,
works.
sí, alegría.
Sí.
Because diversión doesn't work, pero más alegría, menos, I don't know, chunches or cosas. So we need to also think about the different linguistic
Yes, Mike,
implications.
you coined this, and you
Yeah, definitely. Things need to be translated by people that understand the languages. It's not about anything in particular. It's the sentiment.
Yeah, right. Excellent. And John,
I see the working group has started already. I have no
those
I
who
have
want
no
stay
problem.
on. Yes, sir.
I have no problem with this as a short and pithy statement, but to me, it's not the whole story one might want to convey. And someone clever like Einstein or someone said one should simplify as far as possible, but not further. And to my mind, if we don't sort out global governance, we have a problem. And we can have as much joy and fun as we like, but if we have leaders that are destroying the planet, it ain't going to work.
Absolutely. But now, half jokingly here, I see Manuela says we should, to save the UN, we should be saying more funds, less talk. Uh, which, yeah, plays with the words. Great. Okay, I think we're getting somewhere, and I don't know if we are exhausted for today. Or Jan, if you want, please.
I just wanted to inject something that we've been talking about this past weekend at our foundation, which is the concept of orange economy, which is economy of cultural and artistic events. And the Inter-American Development Bank produced an interesting book on that, where you can have fun with the book. And our idea, as we celebrate our 25th anniversary this year, is to try to bring more joy, más alegría, into our lives and the lives of the people we work with and the institutions, etc., through looking at aspects of orange economy. So we're working on something coherent, not just having fun. And in my neighborhood, there are several art cafes. And so we've chosen one that, you know, filled with different art and young artists, and I go up there and talk to them, etc. So I think this concept, which seemed to have gotten buried after it was promoted by the Colombian President Duque in 2020. But we're looking into it. Our people just started talking about it as a way in which we can produce things creatively, programmatically, and at the same time experience joy, love, and peace, strengthen ourselves.
Yeah. Great. We have to revive those communities that can also grow up and take over the world in a way, or exist in many places to be, yeah, critical mass we need, maybe. Interesting things in the chat. I hope you are following. From Laszlo about FEPS, a book on new global deal for the UN Summit of the Future, which covers a lot of sectors, if I remember correctly. The orange economy. Yes, now you know that today the US announced also on movies tariffs and even on cultural things, it seems. So, yeah, we'll see what else. Okay, just to close now, if we are right on time, we are going to have another. We have planned already one more open consultation before the summer on the 2nd of June, because we will be also represented the International Conference on Financing for Development in Seville, FFD4, end of June, beginning of July. We may have a side event also there with partners from the Global South Perspectives Network, like the Inclusive Society Institute of South Africa and Humanizacom of Brazil. So, folks, with the three of us, we hope to have a side event to start rethinking again in a more fun, less stuff way, the financing for development, not to expect the sort of salvation from the money that's never coming from the north, but to mobilize more the all kinds of resources that the South has and all that. We would like to discuss that with you on the 2nd of June if you want, and then we can go more ready to Seville. But in the meantime, we'll activate our working group, I think. So we should stay in touch, please. And if you don't hear from us, write to us, info@foggs.org. And thank you very much once again for a very, very productive and substantive discussion. Yeah.